the most important conversation for global Wall Street that we have today, and Paul, I would say the first quarter.
Oh boy. Robert
Schiffman, for him to put out one fancy piece for Bloomberg Intelligence is like a treat. But we've got three. We've got four. Amazon may have 100 billion plus of M&A firepower. Why Cash King Apple's 97 billion of debt lags riskier peers. What's the central sum of your four brilliant articles recently?
Well, I was actually hoping on an early Tuesday we'd get a chance to talk about the Mets, or maybe a little bit about hockey later in the week, since I am becoming a regular on this show.
Thursday, I think we can do that. We can arrange it. Can we arrange Thursday, like to talk Sidney Crosby?
Well, it'll be Friday morning. The game's Thursday night.
Well, okay, we can do Thursday,
in your
Friday,
part of the world,
whatever.
TD Garden.
Mets we don't do. I mean, Mets, we do it, but Lisa insists we do it, but, we don't. Tell me about the sum of your work. What's the one message for people that own or are angry they don't own the Mag 7?
Yeah, we're trying to just simply demystify uncertainty. There's been so much concern post DeepSeek earlier this year that the world has completely changed, and that all the capital that all these hyperscalers have been putting into AI is for naught. And that these massive semiconductor companies, particularly NVIDIA, is sort of just going the way of legacy technology. And I don't think that's true at all.
So from a credit perspective, how do investors look at these big tech names? I mean, the free cash flow is just extraordinary, and they've been spending a lot of money on AI. Are the credit investors concerned here, the creditors?
Quite frankly, credit side is happier than ever, particularly when the use of capital shifts. Typically when I'm here, you're asking, why aren't these companies raising dividends more?
Right. That's my question.
And I say that actually doesn't make a difference for equity valuations. In this case, what's been happening over the last 18 months or so, particularly over the last 3 to 6 months, is that capital allocation is now shifting from returns of capital to uses of capital for organic growth. We are seeing such a blow up in Capex budgets like we've never seen before. If you go back just a few years ago, a handful of years ago, names like Meta, Alphabet, Microsoft, they were spending $5, $10, maybe $15 billion a year in Capex. Those numbers for the next 12 months, Meta's going to spend $65 billion.
And you're not worried about that?
I'm not worried at all.
Why? Why are you not worried? If Lisa's kids were at home doing that, she'd be worried. Why are we not? Paul, what's the sum? It's like 200 billion or whatever.
Yeah, it's okay.
Why are we not worried about them spending it irresponsibly?
Well, because the alternative is you're basically, from a creditor's perspective, you're flushing it down the toilet if you're buying back shares. The reality is, I don't know if you guys have ever heard this phrase before, you got to spend money to make money. So when you're in Amazon and you're trending in the next few years towards $1 trillion of annual revenues, how do you get there? If you're an Apple or a Microsoft, how many more iPhones can you sell? Or how many versions of Word can you sell? You need new products and services. The vast majority of those core services that you have, you now need to lay on much higher margin services. And that's where this capital spending comes in. The reason why these stocks continue to go up is because there's anticipation for massive growth following this Capex spending. I would much rather have Amazon spend $100 billion building data centers so they can provide AI services over the next 5 years than giving it back to shareholders.
This is a treat. We got Mark Champion on deck in London. We're going to go to him, of course, on what's happening on the continent. But for Global Wall Street, without question, our interview of the week, Robert Schiffman of Bloomberg Intelligence on the gajillions of money that Paul Sweeney wants to be an increased dividend at the Mag 7.
So, Rob, it was one thing for Microsoft, Amazon to go out there and raise billions of dollars in the debt capital markets because interest rates were essentially zero. How about today, with rates higher, does it still make the same sense for them to go out and tap those markets, even though they're all gushing free cash flow?
Yeah, so when you think about the simple math, obviously interest rates are higher. So if you look at what coupons are, average coupons for most of these Mag 7 names are sort of in the 3% range. And, when you've got treasuries where they are today, you're going to be borrowing a lot closer to 5%. So the simple person would say, hey, let's just wait till rates go down. That's the same as if you're buying a house. Sweeney, when you're thinking about putting up another $10 million house in the Hamptons, right?
Yes.
You don't wait for rates to go down. You do it because there's value today and there's going to be a lot more value tomorrow, and you want to sort of enjoy it. I think what happens is there's an ability to lower your cost of capital. This is simple math. The weighted average cost of capital is really what matters. It's just not the absolute cost of debt. When you think about the absolute cost of equity, let's say it's around 10% for all of these companies. But the cost of debt, even if it's 5%, if the debt percentage of your total capital base is only 5 or 7%, it would argue these companies should be issuing tens of billions of dollars in debt right now, lower their weighted average cost of capital, and either reinvest it back into their business or give it out to shareholders.
Well, that's what I want to say. You alluded a number of minutes ago that you thought share buybacks were not an efficient use of money. Speak to the new CFO of Apple about that right now. They have codified share buybacks as part of their financial plan, right?
Yeah, well, listen, the beauty of these names is that even with all this amount of money that they're spending, there's still more that's coming in. I think,
Your chart on Amazon is stunning.
Well,
absolutely stunning.
We've argued Amazon actually can do everything. So Amazon has not bought back any stock for the last couple of years, unlike their peers who've either had dividends for a while or inaugurated dividends in the last year or so. They've actually just been pouring their money back into the business and building cash. Amazon's sitting on over $100 billion of cash. The argument for why they're doing that is that Amazon is going to spend over $100 billion in Capex this year. And that number, who knows, it could grow to $150 billion in the next couple of years.
But they keep making money every 90 days. That's
well,
the heart
that's
of the
beauty. I've said this before. It's like when you go out to a restaurant and you order a nice bottle of wine and you've taken a few sips and the waiter comes over and he tops you off. That's what free cash flow is for these companies. It just keeps pouring in. So they're lucky that
Paul,
there's an excess.
The restaurants I go to, they don't top off.
Hey, Rob, covering the media industry as I did in my career, I was comfortable, and I think equity and debt investors were comfortable with leverage levels of 3, 4, 5 times net debt to EBITDA. How about for these tech companies? Where should they be, do you think?
Well, I think they should be pretty close to zero on a net basis, which is, the amount.
They have so much cash on their balance sheets.
Yeah, right? I mean, here's the reality is that, the tech business, things are changing. Like, there's dominant players that are out there, and their business positions, they're building such big moats. Like, the concern of DeepSeek is that the moat, the protection that they have by spending so much, might not be as big as people thought, and the barriers to entry are actually smaller. I completely disagree. That being said, if you don't stop, if you don't stop, you can never keep going. And I just think that these fears are completely overblown.
One final question. I want you to talk about the culture of tech boys, if you will, I guess, and tech girls as well. Is there some snobism here about not using debt? Are they reading Zvi Bodie up at Boston University and saying, this is our take on corporate finance? Or is it almost a cultural thing that they don't want to do Merton and Modigliani 101?
No, listen, these are really smart people in these treasury groups running these businesses. And I think that you need to have, all this firepower that we talk about is a little bit of fantasy. It's easy to say, why don't you spend another $100 billion? But if and when things do change, whether there's geopolitical issues, whether there's regulatory issues, you need to have such an excess of flexibility that under any environment, you can still spend and you can still grow. So I don't think that's going away. I do think, though, that this whole concept of leverage, it does matter more as you go down the BBB scale, and you're not talking about Mag 7. When you're talking about the smaller semiconductors, semiconductor players, or the smaller hardware providers, the servers, the storage makers like the Dells. That's where it really matters. But I don't think from a finance perspective, these guys are wrong. I just think that they're conservative, and quite frankly, it's worked. It's worked for both the bonds. Ratings are as high as they've ever been. It's worked for financial flexibility, and it's also worked for the equity. So listen, I shouldn't necessarily be running Treasury at Apple, though I think I could do a pretty good job. I think they're just being a little bit conservative because it's still working.
Mark, Mark is next. Rob Schiffman, this has been absolutely phenomenal. I can't say enough, folks, about his work. It is at Paul Sweeney's Bloomberg Intelligence. Can't say enough about that. You get it on the terminal. Brilliant charts. They're in English. It explains so much of this Mag 7